The text message was simple, 3 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. Mommy in jail? It was from my 6-year-old daughter, Emma, sent from my mother's phone at 2 in the morning. I stared at the screen in my car, still wearing my hospital scrubs, exhaustion weighing heavy on my shoulders after another 12-hour shift in the emergency room. My hands trembled as I read it again, then again, thinking maybe I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. But there it was, glowing in the darkness of the hospital parking lot like a neon sign announcing my worst nightmare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I had been working night shifts for 2 years, sacrificing sleep, social life, and precious time with my children to keep us afloat after my divorce. Every night, I kissed Emma and her 8-year-old brother Lucas goodbye, promising I'd see them in the morning with pancakes and stories about my shift. Every morning, I came home to find them already off to school, staying with my mother during my work hours because childcare for night shifts was impossible to find and impossibly expensive. I trusted her, I believed in her, and apparently she had been telling my children that their mother was locked away behind bars like some common criminal. The drive home that night felt like traveling through a tunnel where every streetlight illuminated another piece of a puzzle I never knew existed. My mother, Rebecca Martinez, had been my lifeline since the divorce. When David left us for his secretary, taking half of everything and leaving me with 2 confused children and a mortgage I couldn't afford alone, she stepped in without hesitation. She offered to watch Emma and Lucas during my night shifts, refused to accept payment, and assured me that family takes care of family. She was my hero, my salvation, the grandmother who baked cookies and read bedtime stories while I worked to rebuild our shattered world. But as I pulled into her driveway at 2:30 in the morning, that hero worship crumbled like ancient paper. The house was dark, except for the flickering blue light of the television in the living room. I used my key, the one she insisted I keep for emergencies, and stepped into the space that had felt like safety for 2 years. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft murmur of late-night programming and the gentle breathing of my children asleep on the couch. Emma was curled up under her favorite purple blanket, still clutching the phone she'd somehow managed to text me from. Lucas lay sprawled across the other end of the couch, his arm dangling toward the floor, completely oblivious to the earthquake that was about to hit our family. They looked peaceful, innocent, beautiful. They also looked like children who had been living with a lie that was slowly poisoning their understanding of who their mother really was. I found my mother in the kitchen, sitting at the small round table where she'd served us countless meals over the years, nursing a cup of cold coffee and staring at nothing. She looked up when I entered, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe? Or fear? But it was quickly replaced by the expression she wore whenever she was preparing to justify something unjustifiable. "Marina," she said, my name sounding strange in the quiet darkness. "You're early tonight." I held up my phone, Emma's text message still glowing on the screen. "Mommy in jail?" I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Care to explain what my 6-year-old daughter means by that? The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched between us like a chasm, filled with 2 years of lies I was only beginning to understand. My mother's hands tightened around her coffee mug, knuckles white against the ceramic, and I watched as the woman who raised me, who taught me about honesty and integrity and doing the right thing even when it was hard, struggled to find words that could possibly justify what she'd done. "I can explain," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. She sounded tired, older than her 62 years, like someone who had been carrying a heavy secret for far too long. "Please do," I said, sinking into the chair across from her, "because I have spent every night for the past 2 years working my fingers to the bone to provide for my children, trusting you to care for them, to love them, to be the stable presence they needed while I was gone. And apparently, you've been telling them that their mother is a criminal." The words hung in the air between us like accusations, which they were. Every syllable carried the weight of betrayal, of trust broken so completely that I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. I thought about Emma's small voice on the phone last week, asking me why I couldn't come to her school play. I thought about Lucas refusing to talk about his day, his usual chatter replaced by monosyllabic answers and distant stares. I thought about the way they both seemed to flinch slightly when I reached for them, as if they weren't quite sure who I was anymore. "It wasn't supposed to go on this long," my mother said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "It started as a simple explanation for why you weren't here at night. Children don't understand work schedules, Marina. They don't understand why their mother has to leave them when the sun goes down and other mothers are reading bedtime stories." "So you told them I was in prison?" The incredulity in my voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "That was your solution? To make them believe their mother was locked away somewhere, paying for some crime they couldn't even comprehend?" She looked up then, and I saw tears beginning to form in her eyes. But I felt no sympathy, no desire to comfort her the way I had countless times throughout my life. Those tears belonged to her, earned by choices she made, consequences she would have to live with. My tears were for Emma and Lucas, for the confusion and fear they must have been carrying, for the way they probably lay awake at night wondering what terrible thing their mother had done to deserve being taken away from them.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"I told them you made a mistake," she said, her voice growing defensive. "I told them that sometimes good people make bad choices, and when that happens, they have to go to a special place to think about what they did wrong. I said you were sorry, and that you missed them, and that you'd come home when you learned your lesson." Every word was like a physical blow. I could picture her sitting with my children in this very kitchen, weaving this elaborate fiction with the same gentle voice she'd used to tell me fairy tales when I was small. I could see Emma's wide blue eyes, trying to process why her mommy had to be punished, why she couldn't come home and tuck her in like other mommies did. I could imagine Lucas, always the protector even at 8 years old, probably trying to comfort his little sister while wrestling with his own confusion and fear. And when they asked what I did wrong, I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. My mother's face crumpled slightly. I told them you took something that didn't belong to you, that you were sorry, and that you were working very hard to make it right so you could come home. The room spun slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. My children, my beautiful, innocent children, believed their mother was a thief. They believed I had stolen something and was being punished for it, that I was somewhere far away learning to be better, to be worthy of coming home to them. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, the way it painted me as both criminal and victim, someone who had chosen to leave them, but was also being forced to stay away. 2 years? I whispered, more to myself than to her. For 2 years, they've been living with this lie. For 2 years, they've been visiting with me, having breakfast, playing in the park, and you told them what? That I was on some kind of day release program? The silence was her answer. I realized that every morning when I came home from work, excited to spend a few precious hours with Emma and Lucas before they went to school, they weren't seeing their mother returning from a long night of saving lives and helping people. They were seeing a prisoner, someone who had done something wrong, someone who was lucky to be allowed these brief visits with the family she had somehow failed. I thought about all the times Emma had clung to me extra tightly during those morning hours, the way she sometimes looked at me with a mixture of love and something I couldn't identify. Now I knew what it was. It was pity. It was the look a child gives to someone they love but can't quite trust, someone they're not sure will stay or be taken away again. It was the look you give to someone you're trying to forgive for something you don't fully understand. "The school play," I said suddenly, pieces clicking into place. "Emma's school play last month. She said she didn't want me to come because people might stare. I thought she was just being shy, but she was protecting me, wasn't she? She was afraid people would know her mother was supposed to be in prison." My mother nodded miserably. "She's been telling her classmates that you're away. When they ask where, she says you're at a special place learning to be better. Her teacher called me last week, concerned about Emma's stories. She wanted to know if there was something going on at home that she should be aware of. The betrayal cut deeper with every revelation. Not only had my mother poisoned my children's understanding of who I was, but she had created a web of lies that extended into their school, their friendships, their entire world outside these walls. Emma, my bright, sensitive little girl, had been carrying the burden of keeping her mother's supposed criminal status secret, protecting me from judgment while simultaneously trying to understand why I deserved to be punished in the first place. Lucas has been asking about visiting days, my mother continued, her voice barely audible now. He wants to know when he can come see where you live, why you can't just come home and stay. I've been telling him that the rules are very strict, that you can only leave for short times until you've proven you've learned your lesson. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what she had done. My 8-year-old son, the boy who used to build elaborate Lego cities and explain them to me in excited whispers, had been wondering why his mother's prison wouldn't let her family visit. He had been living in a world where love was conditional, where mothers could be taken away if they made mistakes, where family dinners and bedtime stories were privileges that had to be earned through good behavior. The worst part was that I could see the twisted logic in it. To a child, the concept of a mother working night shifts was abstract, difficult to understand. The idea that mommy had to leave when other mommies stayed, that she had to work when other families were together, that she chose her job over tucking them in at night, that would be confusing and potentially hurtful. But prison, punishment, the idea that mommy was away because she had to be, not because she chose to be, that created a different narrative. It made me a victim of consequences rather than someone who was choosing work over family time. But it also made me a criminal. It made me someone who had broken rules, who couldn't be trusted, who had to earn the right to be with her children. And worse than that, it made my love conditional on my behavior, my presence dependent on my ability to prove I deserved to come home. Did you ever think about what this was doing to them? I asked, opening my eyes to find my mother staring at her hands. Did you consider how this lie would affect their ability to trust, to feel secure, to understand right from wrong? I thought I was protecting them, she said quietly. I thought it was easier than explaining why their mother couldn't be there when they needed her. Easier for who? The question came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care anymore about sparing her feelings. Easier for them to believe their mother was a criminal? Or easier for you to avoid having difficult conversations about divorce and work and the reality of our situation? The truth settled between us like dust after an explosion. My mother had chosen the easy lie over the difficult truth, and in doing so, she had stolen something precious from my children. She had stolen their ability to be proud of their mother, their understanding of sacrifice and hard work, their sense of security in knowing that even when I wasn't physically present, I was out in the world doing something important and necessary. Instead, they had spent 2 years believing that their mother was paying for some unnamed crime, that she was learning to be better so she could earn the right to come home to them. They had learned to love conditionally, to see family as something that could be taken away as punishment, to view their mother through the lens of shame and secrecy. I stood up from the table, my legs unsteady beneath me. The full weight of what I had discovered was beginning to settle on my shoulders, and I felt like I was drowning in the implications of it all. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that grandma has been lying about mommy being in prison? How do you rebuild trust with children who have been taught to see you as someone who made bad choices and had to be punished for them? I need to take them home, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. I need to figure out how to fix this. Marina, please, my mother said, reaching across the table as if to touch my hand. Let me help you explain. Let me be part of making this right. I pulled my hand away before she could reach it, the gesture automatic and sharp. You've done enough explaining for one lifetime, I said. You've been part of enough of my children's lives. I need to figure out how to undo 2 years of damage, and I need to do it without your help. The words were cruel, but they were also true. My mother had positioned herself as the hero in my children's story, the stable grandmother who was taking care of them while their flawed mother served her time and learned to be better. She was the one they trusted, the one they turned to for comfort and explanations, the one who had been shaping their understanding of our family for 2 years. And she had used that trust to create a reality that served her narrative but destroyed mine. I walked into the living room, where Emma and Lucas still slept peacefully on the couch, unaware that their world was about to shift again. Looking at them, I felt a fierce protectiveness surge through me, mixed with a grief so profound it made my chest ache. These were my children, my babies, and they had been living with a lie that made them question everything they thought they knew about love and family and trust. Emma stirred slightly as I gathered her into my arms, her purple blanket trailing behind us. She was heavier than she used to be, growing every day in ways I was missing because of my work schedule, because of the choices I had made to keep us financially stable. But as I carried her toward the car, she nestled against my shoulder with the automatic trust of a child who still, despite everything, knew she was safe with her mother. Lucas woke up as I came back for him, blinking sleepily in the dim light from the kitchen. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with sleep and confusion, "are you supposed to be here?" The innocence of the question broke something inside me. My 8-year-old son was surprised to see his mother, not because it was unusual for me to be there, but because, according to the story he'd been told, I wasn't supposed to be allowed to take them places without permission. I was supposed to be learning my lesson, proving I was worthy of these brief visits with the family I had somehow failed. "I'm taking you home, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and normal. "We're going to have pancakes for breakfast, and then we're going to have a long talk about some things." He nodded sleepily and let me help him to his feet, but I caught the way he glanced back toward the kitchen, where my mother still sat in the darkness. There was something in that look, a checking for permission, a seeking of approval from the authority figure who had been managing his understanding of our family structure for 2 years. It was such a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly the lie had taken root. As I buckled them into their car seats, both children still drowsy and compliant, I caught a glimpse of my mother standing in the doorway of her house. She looked small and frail in her bathroom, older than I had ever seen her, and for just a moment I felt a flicker of the sympathy that had defined our relationship for my entire life. She had raised me alone after my father died, sacrificed her own dreams to make sure I had opportunities, supported me through college and nursing school and the early years of my marriage. She had been my champion, my advisor, my closest friend. But as I started the car and pulled out of her driveway, Emma and Lucas breathing quietly in the back seat, I realized that all of that history couldn't erase what she had done to my children. All of those years of love and support couldn't justify the lie that had stolen 2 years of authentic relationship between me and the two people who mattered most in the world. The drive home was quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of sleeping children and the hum of tires on pavement. But inside my head, everything was chaos. I was trying to figure out how to explain something that should never have needed explaining, how to rebuild trust that should never have been broken, how to help Emma and Lucas understand that their mother wasn't a criminal who had to earn the right to love them. I was also trying to understand how the woman who had taught me about honesty and integrity had looked my children in the eye for 2 years and lied to them about something so fundamental to their sense of security and identity. I was trying to reconcile the mother I thought I knew with the grandmother who had chosen convenience over truth, who had stolen my children's ability to be proud of their working mother and replaced it with shame and secrecy. But most of all, I was trying to prepare myself for the conversation I would have to have with two confused, tired children who were about to learn that the adult they trusted most in the world, besides me, had been lying to them about something that affected their understanding of everything. I was going to have to tell them that Grandma had made up a story about Mommy being in prison, and that Mommy had never done anything wrong except work hard to take care of them. And then I was going to have to help them navigate the complicated emotions that would follow: anger, confusion, betrayal, fear. I was going to have to help them understand that adults sometimes make mistakes, even adults who love them, and those mistakes can have consequences that hurt people we care about. I was going to teach them about forgiveness and boundaries, about truth and trust, about the difference between explaining difficult situations and creating elaborate lies to avoid discomfort. As I pulled into our driveway and looked up at the house that represented everything I had worked so hard to keep after the divorce, I realized that this morning would mark the beginning of a new chapter for our family. Not the chapter I had planned, not the gradual building of stability and security I had been working toward for 2 years, but a chapter about healing from betrayal and rebuilding trust and learning to navigate the complicated reality of family relationships. I sat in the car for a few extra minutes, watching Emma and Lucas sleep, gathering the strength I would need to handle whatever came next. These were my children, and I was their mother, and nothing my own mother had said or done could change that fundamental truth. But the work of helping them understand that truth, of rebuilding their sense of security and trust, of teaching them to see me as the person I actually was rather than the person they had been told I was, that work was going to be the hardest thing I had ever done. And it was work that I would have to do alone, without the support system I had relied on for 2 years, without the woman who had been my partner in raising these children. Because the person I had trusted most to help me give Emma and Lucas a stable, loving childhood had instead chosen to undermine everything I was working for, everything I was sacrificing for, everything I believed about the kind of mother I wanted to be. Tomorrow, I would have to start over. Tomorrow, I would have to begin the process of untangling 2 years of lies and rebuilding 2 years of trust. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out new childcare arrangements, new support systems, new ways of managing the impossible balance between providing for my children and being present for them. But tonight, I just sat in the darkness of my driveway, listening to the quiet breathing of the 2 people who made everything else worth it, and prepared myself for the most important conversation I would ever have to have about truth, trust, and what it really means to be a family. The morning light filtering through our kitchen windows felt different somehow, harsher and more unforgiving than it had just 24 hours earlier. I stood at the counter, mechanically preparing pancakes, while Emma and Lucas sat at the breakfast table, their usual morning chatter replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to fill every corner of our small dining room. They kept glancing at each other, then at me, with expressions I had never seen before. There was uncertainty in their eyes, a wariness that made my heart ache with the knowledge of what I was about to tell them. Emma picked at her food, pushing pieces of pancake around her plate without actually eating much of anything. Lucas sat perfectly still, his orange juice untouched, watching me with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle they didn't understand. These were my children, my babies, and in just a few minutes, I was going to have to shatter their understanding of the last 2 years of their lives. Emma, Lucas, I said, settling into my chair across from them and trying to keep my voice calm and steady. I need to talk to you both about something very important, something that's going to be confusing and maybe a little scary, but I need you to know that no matter what I tell you, Mommy loves you more than anything in the whole world. Emma looked up from her plate, her blue eyes wide and solemn. "Are you in trouble again, Mommy?" she asked, and the innocence of the question nearly broke me. The word "again" carried so much weight, so much assumption about my character and my choices, and I realized that this conversation was going to be even more difficult than I had imagined. "No, sweetheart," I said, reaching across the table to take her small hand in mine. "Mommy has never been in trouble. That's what I need to talk to you about. For the past 2 years, while I've been working at the hospital at night to take care of sick people, Grandma Rebecca has been telling you stories about where I go. But those stories weren't true." Lucas frowned, his 8-year-old mind already trying to process what I was saying. "What do you mean they weren't true?" he asked. "Grandma said you were at the special place, learning to be better. She said you made a mistake and had to think about what you did wrong." The words came out of my son's mouth with such matter-of-fact certainty that I had to take a deep breath before responding. This was the reality they had been living with, the foundation upon which they had built their understanding of our family, their relationship with me, their sense of security in the world.
And now I had to carefully dismantle that foundation and help them build a new one based on truth instead of lies. Honey, Mommy never made a mistake that required punishment, I said, choosing my words carefully. Mommy has been working at the hospital every night, taking care of people who are hurt or sick. That's called being a nurse, and it's a very important job that helps people feel better when they're scared or in pain. Emma's brow furrowed in confusion. But Grandma said you took something that wasn't yours, she said. She said that's why you had to go away and learn your lesson. The casual way she repeated the lie, as if it were a simple fact about her mother's character, made my stomach turn. I realized that this wasn't just about correcting a misunderstanding or clarifying a complicated situation. This was about fundamentally changing my children's perception of who I was as a person, what kind of choices I made, what kind of mother they had. For 2 years, they had been living with the belief that their mother was someone who took things that didn't belong to her, someone who made bad choices and had to be punished for them. They had been operating from the assumption that love and family were conditional, that mothers could be taken away if they didn't behave properly, that the parent they depended on was fundamentally flawed and untrustworthy. Mommy has never taken anything that didn't belong to me, I said firmly. Grandma Rebecca made up that story because she thought it would be easier for you to understand than the truth. But the truth is that Mommy works very hard every night to make sure we have enough money for our house and your clothes and your toys and your food. When I leave at night, I go to the hospital where I help doctors take care of people who are sick or hurt. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness that had always characterized his approach to difficult topics. Finally, he looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than his 8 years. "So you're not in prison?" he asked. "I have never been in prison," I said. "I have never done anything wrong that would require me to be punished. I work at night because that's when the hospital needs me most, and because working at night pays more money than working during the day. That extra money helps us afford this house and the things you need." Emma started crying then, not the dramatic tears of a child who had been denied something they wanted, but the deep, confused sobs of someone whose entire world had just been turned upside down. "But Grandma said," she began, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence as the implications of what I was telling her began to sink in. I moved around the table and gathered her into my arms, feeling her small body shake with the force of emotions she was too young to fully understand. "I know what Grandma said, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair, "and I know this is very confusing and scary. But I need you to understand that when grown-ups are afraid or uncomfortable, sometimes they make very bad choices about what to tell children. Grandma made a very bad choice when she decided to lie to you about where Mommy goes at night." "Why would she lie?" Lucas asked, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like betrayal. At 8 years old, he was beginning to understand that adults were capable of deception, that the people he trusted most could create elaborate stories that weren't true, that love and lies could exist in the same space. It was a question I had been asking myself since I discovered the truth, and I still didn't have an answer that felt adequate or complete. Why would a grandmother who loved her grandchildren choose to poison their relationship with their mother? Why would someone who had taught me about honesty and integrity choose convenience over truth when it came to the most important people in my life? "I think Grandma was scared," I said finally, knowing that it wasn't a complete answer, but hoping it was something they could begin to understand. "I think she was scared that you would be sad or angry about Mommy working at night, and she thought if she told you a different story, it would be easier for you to accept. But what she didn't understand is that lying to people you love, even when you think you're protecting them, always causes more hurt than telling the truth." Emma pulled back to look at me, her face streaked with tears and confusion. "Are you going to keep working at night?" she asked. The question hit me like a physical blow because it revealed so much about what she had been thinking and feeling for 2 years. In her mind, my night work wasn't a job that helped people and supported our family. It was a punishment that I had to endure until I proved I was worthy of coming home to stay. She had been waiting for me to learn my lesson so that I could finally be the kind of mother who was there for bedtime stories and morning breakfast and all the small, daily moments that make up childhood. "Yes, baby," I said gently. "Mommy will keep working at night because that's how I take care of you and Lucas. But now that you know the truth about what I do, we can talk about it differently. You can ask me questions about my job, and I can tell you stories about the people I help, and you can be proud that your mommy does something important that makes sick people feel better." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful in the way that always reminded me he was processing complex emotions and ideas beyond his years. Finally, he looked up at me with a directness that took my breath away. "Were you sad that we thought you were in prison?" he asked. The question was so perceptive, so emotionally intelligent, that I had to pause before answering. My 8-year-old son had just identified the core of my pain with a clarity that adults often struggled to achieve. Yes, I had been sad. More than sad. I had been heartbroken every time they seemed distant, every time they looked at me with something that wasn't quite trust, every time they acted as if my presence in their lives was temporary and conditional. "Yes, sweetheart," I said honestly. "I was very sad that you thought Mommy had done something wrong. I was sad that you couldn't be proud of the work I do, and I was sad that you thought I was being punished instead of helping people. But I wasn't sad at you or Lucas. I was sad that someone you trusted had told you something that wasn't true about someone you love." Emma wiped her nose on her pajama sleeve, a gesture so innocent and automatic that it reminded me how young she still was, how much of her understanding of the world was still being formed by the adults around her. "I'm sorry I believed Grandma instead of asking you," she said, and the apology from my 6-year-old daughter made me want to cry all over again. "You don't need to be sorry, baby," I said firmly. "You trusted Grandma because that's what children are supposed to do with adults they love. You believed her because she's supposed to tell you the truth. This isn't your fault and it isn't Lucas's fault. This is something that happened because a grown-up made a very bad choice, and now we have to figure out how to fix it together." The conversation continued through breakfast and into the late morning, with both children asking questions that revealed how deeply the lie had affected their understanding of our family. Emma wanted to know if other mommies worked at night without being punished. Lucas asked if working at the hospital meant I was allowed to come home because I was being good. They were trying to reconcile 2 years of believing one thing with the sudden revelation that none of it had been true. I answered every question as honestly and age-appropriately as I could, but with each response, I became more aware of the magnitude of what my mother had done. She hadn't just told a simple lie to avoid a difficult conversation. She had created an entire alternate reality that affected how my children saw me, how they understood work and family and consequences, how they processed their own emotions about my absence during night hours. They had spent 2 years believing that their mother's love was something they had to wait for me to earn back through good behavior. They had learned to see my work not as a sacrifice I made for them, but as a punishment I deserved for choices I had made. They had developed a relationship with me that was built on the foundation of shame and conditional acceptance rather than pride and unconditional love. By the time we finished talking, both children were exhausted from the emotional weight of processing such significant information. Emma curled up on the couch with her favorite stuffed animal, and Lucas retreated to his room to think about everything we had discussed. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the breakfast dishes and trying to figure out what came next. The immediate problem was childcare. I had 3 more night shifts scheduled for this week, and I couldn't leave Emma and Lucas with my mother anymore. The trust was broken, but more than that, I couldn't risk them being exposed to any more lies or manipulation. I needed to find alternative arrangements quickly, but night shift childcare was notoriously difficult to find and expensive to maintain. I started making phone calls. Licensed overnight babysitters were rare and cost more per hour than I made during some shifts. Extended family was limited. My mother had been my primary support system since the divorce, and my ex-husband, David, lived across the country with his new wife, contributing the legal minimum in child support and nothing in actual parenting responsibility. My sister Carmen lived 2 hours away with 3 children of her own and a husband who traveled frequently for work. She had her hands full, and while we maintained a decent relationship, it wasn't the kind of close bond that would make overnight childcare a natural request. My father's brother, Uncle Miguel, was kind but elderly, and the idea of leaving 2 young children with him overnight felt irresponsible and unfair. As I worked through my limited options, I realized how isolated I had become during the 2 years since the divorce.
Working night shifts meant missing most social opportunities, and relying on my mother for childcare had created a routine that didn't include building other support networks. I had friends from work, but they were dealing with their own family obligations and couldn't realistically take on the responsibility of watching 2 children several nights a week. The financial calculations were staggering. Professional overnight childcare would cost nearly as much as I earned during my shifts, eliminating the financial benefit of the night differential that had made these hours worthwhile. But finding day shift positions in the current nursing job market was competitive and uncertain, especially positions that paid enough to support our household on a single income. I was trapped between impossible choices, all of them stemming from my mother's decision to lie to my children rather than help them understand the reality of our situation. She had created a crisis that affected not just our emotional relationships, but our practical ability to function as a family. Her lies had consequences that extended far beyond the psychological damage to Emma and Lucas. That afternoon, while the children napped, I called my supervisor at the hospital to explain that I needed to take emergency family leave while I figured out new childcare arrangements. Sandra Rodriguez had been my charge nurse for 3 years, and she had always been supportive of the single mothers on her staff, but I could hear the concern in her voice when I explained the situation. "Marina, I'm so sorry," she said after I finished telling her about my mother's lies. "That's incredibly difficult, both emotionally and practically. How long do you think you'll need?" "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "I need to find reliable overnight childcare, which could take weeks or months depending on what's available. And I need to help my children process what they've learned about their grandmother's lies. I can't leave them with her anymore, but I also can't leave them alone at night." Sandra was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sounds of the hospital bustling in the background, the place where I had found purpose and professional identity over the past few years. "Have you considered switching to day shifts?" she asked. "I know the pay differential isn't as good, but we have some openings and it might solve your childcare problem." It was a practical suggestion, but it came with its own set of complications. Day shift positions paid approximately 30% less than night shifts, a reduction that would make our already tight budget nearly impossible to manage. The night differential had been crucial in allowing me to maintain our mortgage payments and provide for Emma and Lucas without requiring assistance from David or anyone else. "I'll have to run the numbers," I said. "But Sandra, the night shift pay was the only reason I could afford to keep the house after the divorce. If I switched to days, I might not be able to make the mortgage payments." "I understand," she said, and I could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. "Take the time you need to figure it out, Marina. We'll work with you however we can." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, spreadsheets, and calculator, trying to make impossible math work. Every scenario I ran led to the same conclusion. Without the night shift differential, I would have to make significant changes to our lifestyle, possibly including selling the house that represented stability and security for Emma and Lucas after the upheaval of the divorce. The irony was devastating. My mother's lies, supposedly designed to protect my children from the difficult reality of our situation, had created a crisis that threatened to destabilize our lives in ways far more serious than the original challenges of single parenting and night shift work. Her desire to avoid difficult conversations had led to consequences that would require even more difficult conversations and potentially life-altering decisions. As I worked through various childcare options and financial projections, I kept thinking about the children sleeping upstairs, about the way Emma had looked at me that morning when she asked if I was in trouble again. The phrase revealed so much about how she had been processing our interactions for 2 years. Every time I had been tired after a long shift, every time I had been stressed about bills or exhausted from the demands of single parenting, she had interpreted my emotions through the lens of someone who was being punished and trying to earn their way back into good standing. Lucas had been operating from the same flawed foundation, but his response had been different.
Instead of the worried caregiving that Emma had developed, he had become protective and slightly distant, as if he was trying to shield himself from getting too attached to someone who might be taken away again if they made another mistake. He had learned to love conditionally, to hold part of himself back as protection against future loss. The damage was so much deeper than I had initially realized. It wasn't just about correcting false information or clearing up a misunderstanding. It was about helping two children rebuild their entire framework for understanding love, family, trust, and security. It was about teaching them that their mother's love was unconditional, that her presence in their lives wasn't dependent on her behavior or their approval, that work and sacrifice were expressions of love rather than evidence of failure. That evening, after dinner and homework and the normal routines that anchored our days, Emma climbed into my lap while I sat on the couch reading. She was quiet for a while, playing with the buttons on my cardigan, and I could sense that she was working up the courage to ask something important. "Mommy," she said finally, "if you weren't really in prison, why didn't you ever tell us what your job was like?" It was such an insightful question from someone so young, and it forced me to examine my own role in the situation that had developed. While my mother's lies were inexcusable, I realized that I had also failed to actively counteract them or to create opportunities for Emma and Lucas to understand and take pride in my work. I had been so focused on managing the logistics of single parenting and night shift nursing that I hadn't prioritized helping them connect with the meaningful aspects of what I did. "You know what, sweetheart?" I said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "You're absolutely right. I should have told you more about my job, about the patients I help, and the important work that happens at hospitals at night. I was so tired all the time that I forgot you might want to hear stories about the people I take care of." "Can you tell me now?" she asked, settling more comfortably against my chest. For the next hour, I told Emma and Lucas stories from my work that I had never shared before. I told them about Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who came to the emergency room every few months with anxiety attacks, and how I always made sure to warm her blanket and hold her hand until she felt safe. I told them about the teenage boy who had been in a car accident and was scared to call his parents, and how I sat with him until he was ready to make the phone call. I told them about the nights when multiple ambulances arrived at once, and how all the nurses worked together like a perfectly coordinated team to make sure everyone got the help they needed as quickly as possible. I told them about the babies who were born during night shifts, and how I sometimes got to be one of the first people to welcome them into the world. Their faces lit up as they listened, and I realized how much I had missed by not sharing these experiences with them before. They were fascinated by the medical equipment, impressed by the teamwork required in emergency situations, and proud to learn that their mother was someone who helped people during some of the scariest moments of their lives. "That's so much cooler than prison," Lucas said with the blunt honesty that only children possess. And despite everything that had happened, I found myself laughing at his assessment. "It really is," I agreed. "And now that you know what I really do, you can ask me questions about it, and I can tell you more stories, and you can be proud that your mommy has a job that helps people feel better when they're hurt or scared." But even as we talked and laughed and began to rebuild our understanding of my work, I was acutely aware of the larger problems that still needed to be solved. I had managed to correct the immediate misunderstanding about my job and my character, but the trust that had been broken would take much longer to repair. Emma and Lucas were going to need time to process the fact that their grandmother had lied to them about something so fundamental, and they were going to need support in learning how to navigate relationships with adults who had proven themselves capable of deception. More practically, I still needed to find reliable childcare for my remaining night shifts, and I needed to make long-term decisions about our living situation and my career path. The financial pressure was enormous, but the emotional pressure was even greater. Every choice I made now would either reinforce the trust we were rebuilding or potentially damage it further. Over the next few days, as I scrambled to find temporary childcare solutions and explored options for switching to day shifts, I began to understand the true scope of what my mother had done. It wasn't just about the lies she had told. It was about the opportunities for genuine connection that she had stolen from us. The pride my children could have felt in their mother's work, the conversations we could have had about sacrifice and responsibility, and what it means to take care of people. Instead of learning that their mother was someone who worked hard to help others and provide for her family, they had learned that love was conditional, that family members could disappear if they made mistakes, that the adults they trusted most were capable of creating elaborate deceptions. These were lessons that would affect how they approached relationships for the rest of their lives, how they understood trust and honesty, and what it meant to be truly seen and accepted by people who claimed to love them. The anger I felt toward my mother wasn't just about the immediate crisis she had created. It was about the theft of innocence, the corruption of my children's understanding of family and love and security. It was about the way she had positioned herself as the stable, trustworthy adult while painting me as someone whose presence in my children's lives was contingent on my ability to prove my worthiness. And perhaps most painfully, it was about the realization that the woman who had raised me to value honesty and integrity had chosen to sacrifice those values when it became inconvenient to uphold them. She had taught me that love means telling difficult truths and having hard conversations, but when faced with the challenge of helping my children understand a complex family situation, she had chosen the easy lie over the difficult truth. As the week progressed and I pieced together temporary childcare arrangements that cost more than I could sustainably afford, I began to understand that this crisis was about much more than logistics and schedules. It was about the kind of mother I wanted to be, the kind of family I wanted to build with Emma and Lucas, and the kind of relationships I was willing to accept in our lives. My mother called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from defensive justifications to tearful apologies. She wanted to explain her reasoning, to help me understand why she had made the choices she made, to be part of the solution to the problem she had created. But listening to her voice, hearing the familiar patterns of manipulation and emotional appeals that had characterized our relationship for my entire life, I realized that some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome with explanations and apologies. She had looked my children in the eye for 2 years and lied to them about who their mother was. She had stolen their ability to be proud of my work, to understand my sacrifice, to trust in the unconditional nature of my love for them. And she had done it, not to protect them, but to protect herself from having difficult conversations and managing complex emotions. That wasn't the kind of influence I wanted in Emma and Lucas's lives anymore. That wasn't the kind of relationship I was willing to model for them as they learned what it meant to love and trust and be part of a family. My mother called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from defensive justifications to tearful apologies. She wanted to explain her reasoning, to help me understand why she had made the choices she made, to be part of the solution to the problem she had created. But listening to her voice, hearing the familiar patterns of manipulation and emotional appeals that had characterized our relationship for my entire life, I realized that some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome with explanations and apologies. She had looked my children in the eye for 2 years and lied to them about who their mother was. She had stolen their ability to be proud of my work, to understand my sacrifice, to trust in the unconditional nature of my love for them. And she had done it, not to protect them, but to protect herself from having difficult conversations and managing complex emotions. That wasn't the kind of influence I wanted in Emma and Lucas's lives anymore. That wasn't the kind of relationship I was willing to model for them as they learned what it meant to love and trust and be part of a family. The woman who had raised me had also damaged my children, and choosing their well-being over my historical relationship with her wasn't just the right choice, it was the only choice that aligned with the kind of mother I wanted to be. The turning point came on Thursday night when I was preparing to leave for what would be my last night shift with my current childcare arrangement. I had found a neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who was willing to stay with Emma and Lucas overnight, but it was a temporary solution that couldn't continue indefinitely. I was going to have to make a decision about day shifts and the financial compromises that would require. As I was gathering my things and preparing to wake Mrs. Patterson, who would be sleeping in our guest room, Emma appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, looking small and vulnerable in the dim light. "Mommy," she said, "I don't want you to go to work tonight." The simple statement carried so much weight, so much fear, and uncertainty about what my leaving might mean. For 2 years, my departure for night shifts had been colored by the narrative that I was going somewhere I was required to go, somewhere that represented punishment rather than purpose. Now, even though we had talked extensively about the truth of my work, Emma was still processing the emotional residue of believing her mother was being taken away each night as a consequence of bad choices. I knelt down to her level and took her hands in mine. "Baby, I know this is scary because everything has changed so quickly," I said. "But I need you to remember what we talked about. When I go to work, I go to help people who are sick or hurt. I go because it's my job and because it helps us have money for our house and food and the things you need. But what if Grandma was right about something else? Emma asked, and the question revealed the deeper fear that was driving her anxiety. If her grandmother had lied about something so significant, what other information might be unreliable? What other foundations of her understanding might prove to be built on deception? It was a sophisticated fear for someone so young, but it was also completely reasonable given what she had just learned about the adults she had trusted most besides me. Emma was beginning to understand that adults were capable of elaborate deceptions, that love and lies could coexist, that even people who claimed to care about her might prioritize their own comfort over her need for truth and security. "Sweetheart," I said, choosing my words carefully, "Grandma was wrong to lie to you about Mommy's job, but Mommy promises that I will always tell you the truth about where I go and what I do and how much I love you. If you ever have questions or worries, you can always ask me, and I will always give you honest answers." She nodded, but I could see that trust, once broken, wouldn't be easily rebuilt. Emma had learned that adults could look her in the eye and lie about fundamental aspects of her life, and that lesson would color her approach to relationships for years to come. It was a loss of innocence that should never have been necessary, a complication in her emotional development that existed solely because someone she trusted had chosen convenience over truth. After I tucked both children back into bed and left for work, I spent the entire shift thinking about the long-term implications of what my mother had done. It wasn't just about the immediate crisis of finding new childcare or the financial challenges of potentially sleeking to day shifts.
It was about the way this experience would shape Emma and Lucas's understanding of family, trust, and love for the rest of their lives. They were going to grow up knowing that even people who claimed to love them were capable of significant deception. They were going to approach adult relationships with a wariness that should never have been necessary. They were going to carry the emotional scars of believing their mother was a criminal who had to earn the right to love them, even after they learned the truth about my work and character. And I was going to spend years helping them heal from damage that never should have been inflicted, rebuilding trust that never should have been broken, teaching them to see me as the person I actually was, rather than the person they had been told I was. The work of repairing this relationship would be ongoing and difficult, requiring patience and consistency, and probably professional support to address the deeper psychological implications of what they had experienced. But as I moved through the hospital halls that night, checking on patients and administering medications and providing comfort to people in pain, I also felt a growing sense of determination. Emma and Lucas deserved better than the foundation of lies they had been given. They deserved to understand the truth about their mother's work and character. They deserved to feel proud of the sacrifices I made for them, rather than ashamed of the supposed mistakes I had made. And they deserved to learn, even at their young ages, that they had the right to demand honesty from the adults in their lives, that love should never require them to accept lies or deception, that trust was something precious that should be protected and honored by everyone who claimed to care about them. The woman who had raised me had failed them in the most fundamental way possible, but I wasn't going to fail them. I was going to spend however long it took to rebuild what she had damaged, to teach them what she should have taught them, to give them the foundation of truth and trust that every child deserves, but that she had chosen to withhold from them. When my shift ended that morning, I drove home through the sunrise, thinking about the conversation I needed to have with my mother and the boundaries I was going to have to establish to protect my children from further manipulation. The woman who had been my hero for most of my life had revealed herself to be someone who prioritized her own comfort over my children's well-being. And that revelation required me to completely reimagine our family structure and support systems. Emma and Lucas were still sleeping when I arrived home, their faces peaceful and innocent in the morning light. Looking at them, I made a promise that I would spend whatever time and energy it took to help them understand that they were loved unconditionally, that their mother was someone they could be proud of, and that the truth, however difficult, was always better than the most convenient lie. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of Riverside Elementary School, wearing my crisp day shift scrubs and a confidence I had built from scratch. The parent-teacher conference table was covered with Emma's artwork, math worksheets, and reading assessments. But what caught my attention was the essay she had written about community helpers.
In careful first-grade handwriting, she had written about nurses who work in hospitals to help sick people feel better, and how her mommy was a nurse who saved lives every day. Mrs. Thompson, Emma's teacher, smiled as she noticed me reading it. "She's been talking about your work constantly since the beginning of the school year," she said. "Last week, when we had career day, she stood up and told the whole class that her mother helps people who are hurt and that nursing is one of the most important jobs in the world." The pride in her teacher's voice was matched by the pride swelling in my chest as I looked at my daughter's words on paper. This was the child who 6 months earlier had been ashamed to invite me to her school events because she thought people might stare at the mother who was supposed to be in prison. This was the little girl who had learned to love conditionally and live with secrets, now boldly claiming her mother's profession and celebrating the work that I did. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. Those first few weeks after discovering my mother's lives had been some of the most challenging of my life, filled with difficult conversations, financial stress, and the enormous task of rebuilding trust that should never have been broken. But sitting in that classroom, reading Emma's essay about community helpers and listening to her teacher describe her newfound confidence in talking about our family, I realized that we had not just survived the crisis, we had emerged stronger, more honest, and more connected than we had ever been before. The childcare solution had come from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who had helped during those first emergency nights, mentioned my situation to her daughter Sarah, a nursing student who was looking for ways to earn money while maintaining a flexible schedule that accommodated her classes. Sarah was responsible, trustworthy, and genuinely enjoyed spending time with Emma and Lucas. More importantly, she understood the demands of healthcare work and respected the importance of what I did at the hospital. The financial equation had required creativity and compromise, but it was manageable. Switching to day shifts meant a significant pay cut, but it also meant being home for bedtime stories and morning breakfast and all the small daily moments that I had been missing. The reduced income required careful budgeting and some lifestyle adjustments, but Emma and Lucas adapted to these changes far more easily than they had adapted to believing their mother was a criminal. We sold my car and bought a used one with lower monthly payments. We canceled subscription services we didn't really need and started cooking more meals at home instead of relying on takeout during my rushed periods between sleep and work. We turned bill paying into a family activity where Emma and Lucas helped me organize receipts and calculate totals, learning about money management while contributing to the household routine. These weren't sacrifices that felt painful or limiting. They were choices that brought us closer together, that helped my children understand how families work together to take care of each other, that demonstrated the connection between work and resources and the security they provided. Instead of seeing me as someone whose presence was conditional and whose work was punishment, they began to understand that everything I did was an expression of love and commitment to our family. The most significant change was in our communication. I started involving Emma and Lucas in age-appropriate discussions about my work schedule, my patient assignments, and the interesting cases I encountered. They learned medical vocabulary and asked sophisticated questions about different types of injuries and illnesses. Emma became fascinated with bandages and started carrying a toy stethoscope in her backpack. Lucas developed an interest in anatomy and could explain the basic function of major organs with impressive accuracy for someone his age. But the healing process extended beyond just correcting the lies about my profession. Emma and Lucas had to learn how to trust again, how to believe that the information they were receiving from adults was accurate and reliable, how to feel secure in relationships that had been fundamentally shaken by deception. This required ongoing conversations about truth-telling, about what to do when adults say things that don't seem right, about the difference between protecting someone's feelings and lying about important facts. I enrolled both children in counseling with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a child psychologist who specialized in helping families rebuild trust after traumatic revelations. The sessions were initially difficult, with Emma and Lucas struggling to articulate their confusion and anger about what they had discovered. But Dr. Walsh helped them develop language for their emotions and strategies for processing the complex feelings that came with learning that someone they trusted had been lying to them. Children are remarkably resilient, Dr. Walsh told me after one of our sessions, but they also internalize lessons about relationships from their earliest experiences. Emma and Lucas are going to be more cautious about trusting adults, but they're also going to be more discerning about the quality of relationships they accept in their lives.
What your mother did was harmful, but your response has been exemplary in terms of prioritizing their emotional well-being and teaching them that they deserve honesty from people who claim to love them. The professional validation meant more to me than I had expected. For months, I had been second-guessing every decision, wondering if I was handling the situation correctly, questioning whether I was being too harsh in my response to my mother's attempts at reconciliation. Dr. Walsh's assessment helped me understand that protecting my children from further manipulation wasn't cruel or vindictive. It was responsible parenting that prioritized their long-term emotional health over short-term family harmony. My mother's attempts at contact had been relentless and varied. Phone calls, text messages, letters dropped off at our house, gifts left on our doorstep with notes attached. She recruited relatives to intervene on her behalf, enlisted family friends to deliver messages about her remorse and desire to make things right. The pressure was enormous, especially because many of these well-meaning intermediaries didn't fully understand what she had done or why I was maintaining such strict boundaries. "She's your mother, Marina," my Aunt Sophia said during one particularly difficult phone conversation. "She made a mistake, but she loves those children. Don't you think you're being a little harsh? Family is supposed to forgive and move forward." It was the same conversation I had with multiple family members who couldn't understand why I wasn't rushing to repair the relationship and restore the previous dynamic. They saw my mother's tears and heard her apologies, and they couldn't comprehend why those things weren't enough to fix what had been broken. They viewed my boundaries as punishment rather than protection, my caution as cruelty rather than responsible parenting. "She didn't make a mistake," I explained to Sophia, as I had explained to others. "She made a deliberate choice to lie to my children about who their mother was for 2 years. She taught them that love is conditional, that their parent could be taken away if she made bad choices, that they should be ashamed of the work I do to support our family. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern of behavior that prioritizes her comfort over their emotional well-being." The family pressure was intense, but it also clarified something important for me. The people who were pushing me to reconcile with my mother were operating from the same framework that had allowed her lies to flourish in the first place. They valued family harmony over individual well-being, preferred comfortable lies to difficult truths, and expected the injured party to minimize their pain in service of maintaining relationships. That wasn't the kind of family dynamic I wanted to model for Emma and Lucas. I wanted them to learn that they had the right to expect honesty from people who claim to love them, that their emotional well-being was more important than maintaining dysfunctional relationships, that love should never require them to accept treatment that made them feel confused, ashamed, or insecure. The breakthrough came during one of our evening conversations, about 4 months after I had discovered the lies. Emma and I were cooking dinner together, something that had become possible since I switched to day shifts, when she looked up at me with the serious expression that meant she was processing something important. "Mommy," she said, carefully measuring rice into the pot, "I used to think that when you came home in the morning, you were tired because being in prison was hard work. But now I know you're tired because helping sick people is hard work." The casual way she stated this revelation, as if she was commenting on the weather or the color of the sky, demonstrated how completely her understanding had shifted. She no longer saw my fatigue as evidence of punishment endured, but as evidence of meaningful work accomplished. She no longer interpreted my emotions through the lens of someone who was being disciplined, but through the lens of someone who was making important contributions to the world. "That's exactly right, sweetheart," I said, pausing in my dinner preparation to give her my full attention. "And now you know that when Mommy is tired, it's because she spent all day helping people feel better, not because she was somewhere she didn't want to be." Lucas, who had been setting the table nearby, stopped what he was doing and joined our conversation. "I told my friend Jeremy that my mom is a nurse and that she saves people's lives," he said, with the pride that I had dreamed of hearing in his voice for years. "He said that was really cool and asked if you ever had to do CPR on anyone." These moments of recognition and pride were like small miracles, evidence that the foundation we were rebuilding was stronger and more honest than what had existed before.
Instead of living with secrets and shame, Emma and Lucas were learning to take ownership of their family story, to feel confident in explaining who their mother was and what she did, to see our circumstances as something to be proud of rather than something to hide. The professional changes I had made were paying dividends beyond just the improved family schedule. Day shift nursing had connected me with a different team of colleagues, and I found myself building friendships and professional relationships that had been impossible during the isolation of night work. I was invited to unit meetings, included in professional development opportunities, and able to participate in the hospital's community outreach programs. One of those programs involved visiting schools to teach children about healthcare careers, and when I mentioned it to Emma and Lucas, they were thrilled at the possibility of having their mother visit their classrooms to talk about nursing. The enthusiasm in their voices was everything I had hoped for during those long nights when they believed I was somewhere else entirely, paying for crimes I had never committed. "Can you bring your stethoscope?" Emma asked, bouncing with excitement. "And can you tell them about the time you helped the little girl who fell off her bike?" "Can you explain how emergency rooms work?" Lucas added, "and show them what nurses really do?" Their questions revealed how much they had absorbed from our conversations about my work, how completely they had embraced the reality of what I did and integrated it into their understanding of who their mother was. They weren't just proud of my profession, they were eager to share it with their friends, to have their classmates understand that their family was built around service and care and helping others. The school visits were transformative for all of us. Emma and Lucas beamed with pride as I demonstrated how to take blood pressure and explained the importance of hand washing and described the teamwork that happened in hospitals every day. Their classmates asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely impressed by the work that nurses do, especially during night shifts when most people are sleeping safely in their homes. After one particularly successful presentation at Lucas's school, his teacher pulled me aside. "I have to tell you," she said, "Lucas has been talking about your work all year. He used to be quite reserved when we discussed families and careers, but since the fall, he's been one of the most enthusiastic participants whenever we talk about community helpers." The timeline she mentioned aligned perfectly with when I had started being honest with my children about my work, when we had begun building our new foundation of truth and trust. It was evidence that authenticity and pride were far more powerful than shame and secrecy, that children thrived when they could openly claim their family story rather than hide parts of it. The financial adjustments continued to require creativity, but we were managing better than I had expected. Day shift nursing had connected me with a different team of colleagues, and I found myself building friendships and professional relationships that had been impossible during the isolation of night work. I was invited to unit meetings, included in professional development opportunities, and able to participate in the hospital's community outreach programs. One of those programs involved visiting schools to teach children about healthcare careers, and when I mentioned it to Emma and Lucas, they were thrilled at the possibility of having their mother visit their classrooms to talk about nursing. The enthusiasm in their voices was everything I had hoped for during those long nights when they believed I was somewhere else entirely, paying for crimes I had never committed. "Can you bring your stethoscope?" Emma asked, bouncing with excitement. "And can you tell them about the time you helped the little girl who fell off her bike?" "Can you explain how emergency rooms work?" Lucas added, "and show them what nurses really do?" Their questions revealed how much they had absorbed from our conversations about my work, how completely they had embraced the reality of what I did and integrated it into their understanding of who their mother was. They weren't just proud of my profession, they were eager to share it with their friends, to have their classmates understand that their family was built around service and care and helping others. The school visits were transformative for all of us. Emma and Lucas beamed with pride as I demonstrated how to take blood pressure and explained the importance of hand washing and described the teamwork that happened in hospitals every day. After one particularly successful presentation at Lucas's school, his teacher pulled me aside. "I have to tell you," she said, "Lucas has been talking about your work all year. He used to be quite reserved when we discussed families and careers, but since the fall, he's been one of the most enthusiastic participants whenever we talk about community helpers." The timeline she mentioned aligned perfectly with when I had started being honest with my children about my work, when we had begun building our new foundation of truth and trust. It was evidence that authenticity and pride were far more powerful than shame and secrecy, that children thrived when they could openly claim their family story rather than hide parts of it. The financial adjustments continued to require creativity, but we were managing better than I had expected.
The reduced income from switching to day shifts was partially offset by decreased childcare costs and the ability to prepare more meals at home rather than relying on expensive convenience options during my rushed schedule transitions. Emma and Lucas adapted to our new budget with remarkable maturity, suggesting ways to save money and taking pride in contributing to our household management. We started a family tradition of budget meetings where I explained our monthly expenses and income in age-appropriate terms, and they helped me prioritize spending and identify areas where we could reduce costs. These conversations taught them valuable lessons about money management and family responsibility, but they also demonstrated the respect I had for their intelligence and their right to understand the realities of our family situation. "We don't need to go to the expensive pizza place for my birthday," Lucas announced during one of these meetings. "We can make pizza at home and use the money we save for Emma's dance classes." The generosity and thoughtfulness of his suggestion brought tears to my eyes, but they were tears of pride rather than sadness. This was the child who had once believed his mother was serving time for stealing, now taking ownership of our family's financial well-being and making sacrifices to ensure his sister could pursue activities that brought her joy. The transformation was complete and profound and beautiful. 8 months after discovering my mother's lies, I received a letter that I almost didn't open. The envelope was addressed in my mother's familiar handwriting, but unlike her previous communications, this one didn't have the desperate urgency that had characterized her earlier attempts at contact. It felt different somehow, more thoughtful and less demanding, and after carrying it around unopened for several days, I finally decided to read what she had written. The letter was 8 pages long, handwritten on the cream-colored stationery she had always used for important communications. It began with a detailed acknowledgement of what she had done, not just the lies themselves, but the impact they had had on Emma and Lucas's emotional development and their relationship with me. She didn't minimize the damage or offer excuses for her choices. Instead, she took full responsibility for creating a crisis that had affected every aspect of our family's functioning. She wrote about the sleepless nights she had experienced since learning that I had discovered her lies, about the therapy sessions she had started attending to understand why she had made such destructive choices, about the grief she felt over losing her relationship with her grandchildren, and the fear that she might never have the opportunity to earn their trust again. But what struck me most about the letter was its focus on Emma and Lucas rather than on her own pain or her desire for reconciliation. She wrote about specific memories of things they had said or done that revealed how her lies had affected them, about conversations she had had with Dr. Walsh to better understand the psychological impact of her deception, about the work she was doing to become someone who deserved to be part of their lives again. "I know that saying sorry isn't enough," she wrote in the final paragraph. "I know that 2 years of lies can't be erased with apologies or explanations or promises to do better. But I want you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then, that protecting children means telling them the truth in age-appropriate ways, not creating elaborate lies to avoid discomfort. I failed Emma and Lucas, and I failed you, and I understand why you can't trust me with their hearts anymore." The letter ended with a request that surprised me. Instead of asking for forgiveness or pushing for reconciliation, she asked permission to continue working with Dr. Walsh and to send periodic updates about her progress, not with any expectation of response, but simply to demonstrate her commitment to becoming someone who could eventually be trusted with the emotional well-being of children. "I don't know if there will ever be a place for me in your family again," she concluded, "but I want to do the work to become worthy of that possibility, even if it takes years, even if it never happens. Emma and Lucas deserve better than what I gave them, and you deserve support that builds up your family rather than tearing it down." I read the letters 3 times, sitting on my front porch while Emma and Lucas played in the backyard, their laughter carrying on the afternoon breeze. The woman who had written these words sounded different from the person who had spent months making excuses and seeking shortcuts to reconciliation. There was a depth of understanding and accountability that hadn't existed in her previous communications, a recognition that real change required sustained effort rather than dramatic gestures. But trust, once broken so fundamentally, couldn't be rebuilt with letters and therapy sessions and promises of future better behavior. Emma and Lucas had learned to live without their grandmother's presence, and they were thriving in an environment built on honesty and mutual respect. The question wasn't whether my mother was capable of change, but whether exposing my children to the process of that change was worth the risk of further disappointment or manipulation.
That evening, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she asked me about the letter she had seen me reading on the porch. "Was that from Grandma Rebecca?" she said, her voice carefully neutral in the way children adopt when they're trying to navigate complicated adult emotions. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, sitting on the edge of her bed and smoothing her blanket. "Grandma wrote to say that she's sorry for lying to you and Lucas, and that she's working with a doctor to learn how to be more honest and trustworthy." Emma was quiet for a moment, considering this information with the seriousness that had become characteristic of her approach to discussions about family. "Do you think she's really sorry, or do you think she's just sad that we don't visit anymore?" she asked. The perceptiveness of her question took my breath away. My 6-year-old daughter had learned to distinguish between genuine remorse and self-serving regret, between accountability and manipulation, between someone who was sorry for the harm they had caused and someone who was simply sorry for the consequences they were experiencing. "That's a very smart question, baby," I said, "and I think the answer is that people can be both things at the same time. Grandma might be truly sorry for hurting you, and she might also be sad because she misses spending time with you and Lucas. But the most important thing is that we're safe and happy and telling each other the truth, and we don't have to let anyone back into our lives until we're sure they can be trusted to keep us safe and happy." "I like it better now," Emma said quietly. "When you come home from work, I know you were helping sick people instead of being punished for something bad. And when we talk about your job, I don't have to keep secrets from my friends." Her words captured the essence of what we had gained by choosing truth over convenience, honesty over harmony. Emma and Lucas were learning to live authentically, to take pride in their family story, to trust that the information they received from me was reliable and accurate. They were developing emotional intelligence and critical thinking skills that would serve them throughout their lives, skills that had been cultivated in response to betrayal, but had ultimately made them stronger and more discerning. A year after the discovery, I made a decision that surprised even me. I applied for a position in the hospital's pediatric unit, a day shift role that would allow me to work specifically with children and families facing medical crises. The position paid slightly less than emergency room nursing, but it offered something more valuable: the opportunity to use my experience as a single mother to help other families navigate difficult situations with honesty and support. The interview process was competitive, but my experience in both emergency nursing and single parenting gave me unique qualifications for understanding the needs of families under stress. During my final interview, I found myself talking about the importance of honest communication with children, about the ways that lies intended to protect often caused more harm than difficult truths, about the resilience children demonstrated when they were treated as capable of understanding age-appropriate information about challenging situations. "It sounds like you have very personal insights into family crisis management," the hiring manager observed, and I realized that my mother's betrayal had equipped me with professional skills that I might never have developed otherwise. "I've learned that children are much stronger and more perceptive than adults often give them credit for," I said.
They can handle difficult truths when they're presented with love and support, but they struggle to recover from lies that undermine their sense of security and trust. I got the job, and with it came opportunities I had never imagined. Working in pediatrics allowed me to help other families facing medical crises, to advocate for honest communication between healthcare providers and young patients, to support parents who were struggling to explain complicated situations to confused and frightened children. Emma and Lucas were fascinated by my new role and proud to tell people that their mother specialized in helping sick children feel better. They started asking if they could visit the hospital sometime to see where I worked, and when I arranged a special tour for them and several other children from their school, they walked through the pediatric unit with the confidence of kids who understood exactly what their mother did and why it mattered. During the tour, Emma stopped in front of a room where a little girl about her age was recovering from surgery, connected to monitors and looking scared and lonely. "Mom," she whispered, "could we maybe leave her one of my get well cards?" The empathy and generosity in her question revealed how much our family had healed and grown. Instead of viewing medical situations through the lens of punishment and shame, Emma had learned to see them as opportunities for compassion and connection. Instead of feeling embarrassed by association with hospitals and healthcare, she felt proud to be part of a family that contributed to healing and recovery. The Get Well card project became a regular family activity. Emma and Lucas started making cards for the children in my unit, decorating them with drawings and writing encouraging messages that I could deliver during my shifts.
The patients loved receiving artwork from kids their own age, and my colleagues were impressed by my children's understanding of empathy and their desire to help other families facing difficult situations. "Your kids are pretty amazing," my supervisor noted during one of our monthly check-ins. "They've really embraced what you do here and found ways to be part of it, even though they're not old enough to volunteer officially." The recognition felt like validation of all the work we had done to rebuild our family on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. Emma and Lucas had learned to see my profession as something they could actively support rather than something they had to accept or endure. They had developed a sense of ownership and pride in our family story that extended beyond just understanding what I did to actively participating in the mission of helping others. 18 months after cutting contact with my mother, I received a call from Dr. Walsh requesting a family meeting to discuss something important. Emma and Lucas had been making excellent progress in therapy, she explained, and had reached a point where they felt secure enough in their relationship with me to consider the possibility of limited contact with their grandmother under carefully controlled circumstances. "They've been asking questions about her," Dr. Walsh said during our phone conversation, "not because they miss the relationship they had before, but because they're curious about whether people can really change and what forgiveness looks like in practical terms. This isn't about them needing their grandmother in their lives. This is about them wanting to explore concepts of accountability and redemption from a position of strength and security." The idea of any contact with my mother still made me nervous, but I trusted Dr. Walsh's professional judgment and my children's emotional intelligence. If Emma and Lucas were ready to explore the possibility of a different kind of relationship with their grandmother, one built on truth rather than lies, then I owed it to them to consider that possibility carefully. The meeting took place in Dr. Walsh's office on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Emma and Lucas sat close to me on the comfortable couch, occasionally reaching for my hand when the conversation touched on difficult topics, but generally appearing calm and confident as they discussed their feelings about their grandmother's lies and their thoughts about potentially seeing her again. "I want to ask her why she thought lying was better than telling the truth," Emma said, with the directness that had become her trademark since we started prioritizing honest communication. "And I want to know if she understands that what she did was wrong, not just that it made people sad." Lucas nodded agreement. "I want to make sure she knows that Mommy is a hero, not someone who made bad choices," he said. "And I want her to promise that she'll never lie to us again about anything important." Their conditions for potential reconciliation were sophisticated and appropriate, demonstrating that they had internalized the lessons about trust and honesty that we had been working on together. They weren't seeking reunion because they missed their grandmother or felt sorry for her loneliness. They were considering the possibility of a relationship because they wanted to explore whether someone who had betrayed them was capable of earning their trust again. Dr. Walsh facilitated the conversation with skill and sensitivity, helping Emma and Lucas articulate their expectations and boundaries while ensuring that they understood they had complete control over the pace and extent of any future contact. There would be no pressure to forgive or forget, no expectation that they would return to the previous relationship dynamic, no assumption that their grandmother's remorse automatically entitled her to access to their lives. "If we decide to see Grandma again," Emma said near the end of our session, "it would be like meeting someone new, right? Not like going back to how things were before." "That's exactly right, sweetheart," I said. "If we decide to have any contact with Grandma, it would be starting fresh, with new rules about honesty and respect, and only if you and Lucas feel comfortable and safe." The decision to allow supervised visits was made gradually and carefully, with multiple conversations and clear agreements about boundaries and expectations. My mother would need to continue her therapy work, demonstrate sustained accountability for her actions, and commit to absolute honesty in all future interactions with Emma and Lucas. The first visit took place in Dr. Walsh's office, with both children prepared for the possibility that they might feel angry, sad, confused, or any combination of emotions when they saw their grandmother again. My mother looked older and smaller than I remembered, and there was a humility in her demeanor that hadn't existed before. "Emma, Lucas," she said quietly when they entered the room, "I want you to know that I'm sorry I lied to you about your mother. I was wrong to tell you she was in prison when she was actually working at the hospital helping sick people. I was wrong to make you feel ashamed of her when you should have been proud of her." The apology was simple and direct, without the elaborate justifications and emotional appeals that had characterized her previous attempts at reconciliation. Emma and Lucas listened carefully, occasionally glancing at me for reassurance, but generally appearing calm and in control of the situation. "Why did you think lying was better than telling the truth?" Emma asked, and her question demonstrated the emotional growth and critical thinking skills she had developed over the past year and a half. My mother paused before answering, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. "I thought it would be easier for you to understand," she said finally, "but I was wrong about that. I was thinking about what would be easier for me, not about what would be better for you."
That was selfish, and I'm sorry. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Emma and Lucas asking thoughtful questions and my mother providing honest, accountable answers. There were no promises about returning to the previous relationship, no expectations about future visits, just an opportunity for my children to seek understanding and for my mother to demonstrate the personal growth she had been working toward. When we left Dr. Walsh's office that day, both children seemed thoughtful and peaceful rather than upset or confused. They had faced the person who had lied to them and asked the questions they needed to ask, and they had done it from a position of strength and security rather than vulnerability and need. "How do you feel about seeing Grandma?" I asked as we drove home. "It was okay," Lucas said. "She seemed different, sadder, but also more honest." "I think she really is sorry," Emma added, "but I'm glad we don't have to see her again until we want to." Their responses revealed the emotional intelligence and self-advocacy skills they had developed through this difficult experience. They had learned to trust their own perceptions, to maintain appropriate boundaries, and to distinguish between someone's potential for change and their obligation to accept that person back into their lives. Over the following months, we had several more supervised visits with my mother, each one building gradually toward a new kind of relationship based on honesty and respect rather than convenience and control. Emma and Lucas remained cautious but curious, asking direct questions about her therapy work and holding her accountable for maintaining the truthfulness she had promised. The relationship that emerged was different from what had existed before, more careful and intentional, with clear boundaries and ongoing conversations about trust and honesty. My mother had to earn every interaction with my children, had to prove repeatedly that she was committed to supporting their emotional well-being rather than prioritizing her own comfort. But perhaps most importantly, Emma and Lucas learned that they had the power to define the terms of their relationships with adults, that love should never require them to accept lies or manipulation, and that they deserved to have their intelligence and emotional needs respected by everyone who claimed to care about them. 2 years after discovering the lies that had shaped my children's understanding of our family for so long, I stood in the same hospital break room where I had first read Emma's confused text message about Mommy being in jail. But everything was different now. I was wearing day shift scrubs instead of night shift ones, heading home to children who were proud of my work rather than ashamed of my supposed crimes, ending a shift that had allowed me to help families communicate honestly about medical crises rather than beginning a shift that I would complete in isolation and exhaustion. Emma and Lucas were waiting for me in the parking lot with Sarah, who had become like an older sister to them over the months she had provided childcare support. They ran toward me with the excitement of children who knew their mother was coming home from important work, not returning from punishment she had to endure. "Mommy," Emma called, launching herself into my arms. "Sarah helped us make dinner, and Lucas learned how to make salad dressing from scratch." "And Emma drew a picture of the heart surgery you told us about," Lucas added, holding up a colorful drawing that showed stick figures and scrubs helping a patient feel better. These were my children, and I was their mother, and nothing anyone had said or done could change the fundamental truth of our love for each other. The lies were behind us now, replaced by honesty and pride, and the kind of trust that could only be built through choosing difficult truths over comfortable deceptions. We were exactly where we belonged, together, honest, and unashamed of who we were and what we had survived. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.